I didn't disappear all at once. I vanished slowly, politely, without anyone noticing, including myself. For most of my life, I believed I was a caring person. Attentive. Present. The kind who listened deeply, remembered details, adapted easily. I prided myself on being emotionally available, on making space for others, on understanding without needing to be understood. It felt like a virtue. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't just loving people, I was dissolving into them. I learned early how to adjust. How to soften opinions. How to prioritize harmony over honesty. How to read a room and shape myself into whatever made things easier. I didn't think of it as self-sacrifice. I thought of it as empathy. And for a long time, people loved me for it. They said I was supportive. Easy to be with. Someone who never made things complicated. Someone who didn't demand much. Inside, something quiet was happening. Every time I chose understanding over expression, I stepped a little further away from myself. Every time I said it's fine when it wasn't, I taught my own feelings to stay silent. I didn't notice the cost at first because the reward was immediate approval, closeness, peace. I mistook closeness for connection. Relationships became the center of my identity. Not because I was desperate but because they gave me shape. I knew who I was in relation to others. Their needs organized my life. Their emotions gave my days direction. Without them, I felt undefined. That should have frightened me. Instead, it felt normal. I was always with someone emotionally, mentally, energetically. Even when I was alone, I carried other people's voices in my head. Their expectations. Their moods. Their problems. I rarely asked myself what I wanted because there was always someone else who needed clarity more than I did. I told myself that this was what love looked like. Years passed like that. Relationships changed. Some ended. Some transformed. New ones began. And in every single one, I played the same role: the listener, the supporter, the one who adjusted first. I became very good at disappearing. Not physically. Emotionally. I stopped sharing parts of myself that didn't fit the dynamic. I filtered my reactions. I delayed my needs. I learned how to be essential without being visible. People rarely asked me how I was. Not because they didn't care but because I rarely gave them a reason to. The first time I felt something was wrong, it was subtle. I was sitting across from someone I loved, listening carefully, offering comfort, and suddenly I felt detached from my own body. Like I was watching myself perform care instead of actually feeling present. The moment passed. I ignored it. Later, it happened again. And again. Moments where I felt hollow while doing all the right things. Moments where connection felt one-sided in a way I couldn't quite explain. I told myself I was just tired. I always told myself that. The truth is, I didn't know how to exist in relationships without shrinking. I didn't know how to stay whole while being close. No one had ever taught me that love didn't require disappearance. I thought that if I asked for too much, I would lose people. So I asked for almost nothing. I thought that if I showed discomfort, I would become a burden. So I absorbed discomfort quietly. I thought that love meant adaptation. And adaptation, taken far enough, becomes erasure. The breaking point didn't arrive with shouting or betrayal. It arrived with absence. One relationship ended gently. No drama. No anger. Just a quiet realization that things weren't working anymore. We parted respectfully, kindly, almost lovingly. And then I was alone. Really alone. Not just without a partner, without a mirror. For the first time in years, there was no one reflecting me back to myself. No one whose needs structured my day. No one whose emotions I could organize myself around. And in that silence, a terrifying question surfaced: who am I when I'm not being what someone else needs? I waited for an answer. Nothing came. That was the moment I understood how completely I had disappeared. Being alone didn't feel peaceful. It felt disorienting. Without someone else's emotional gravity pulling me into orbit, my days lost their shape. Time stretched awkwardly. Mornings felt empty, not restful. Evenings felt unfinished, like conversations that had stopped mid-sentence. I realized how much of my identity had been borrowed. I didn't miss the person as much as I missed the role. The structure. The constant reference point that told me who I was supposed to be. Without it, I felt strangely transparent, as if I existed, but had no outline. I tried to distract myself at first. I filled the silence with noise, with routines, with harmless habits. But none of it worked for long. Whenever things went quiet, the same uncomfortable awareness returned. I didn't know myself. Not in the way people mean when they talk about self-discovery in abstract terms. I knew my preferences, my skills, my history. But I didn't know my inner weight. I didn't know what mattered to me when no one else's feelings were involved. That absence scared me. I began to replay my relationships in my mind, not to assign blame, but to understand patterns. And slowly, a painful clarity emerged. I had chosen people who needed me. Not consciously. Not manipulatively. But consistently. I was drawn to emotional asymmetry because it gave me purpose. If someone needed support, guidance, patience, I knew how to be valuable. I knew how to stay. Equality terrified me. Equal relationships would have required me to show up as a full person, not a function. They would have asked me what I wanted, how I felt, where I stood. Questions I had spent years avoiding. So instead, I disappeared into caretaking. I realized how often I had mistaken intensity for intimacy. How often I had confused being needed with being loved. I had felt close to people because I was essential to their emotional stability, not because they truly knew me. That realization hurt more than the breakup itself. It meant that much of the closeness I had experienced was built on imbalance. On my silence. On my willingness to bend until I fit. I started noticing the consequences of that pattern. I struggled to make decisions for myself. Simple choices felt overwhelming because I was used to filtering them through someone else's needs. I waited instinctively for feedback that never came. I felt guilt for wanting anything at all. Even alone, I caught myself minimizing my desires, explaining them away internally, as if someone else were listening. The habit of self-erasure had outlived the relationships that taught it. There were moments when I almost went back. Not to that specific person but to the pattern. The idea of being needed again felt comforting. Familiar. It promised relief from the terrifying task of defining myself. But something stopped me. I realized that if I returned to that way of loving, I would disappear completely. There would be nothing left to come back from next time. That thought terrified me more than loneliness ever had. So I stayed alone. And loneliness did what connection never had. It forced me to face myself without distraction. The days were heavy. I cried without knowing exactly why. I felt anger surface not toward others, but toward the version of myself that had learned to survive by becoming invisible. I grieved the years I had spent shrinking. Grief has a way of stripping things down to their truth. And the truth was this: I had never believed that I could be loved without disappearing. That belief had shaped every relationship I ever had. I didn't know where it came from originally. Maybe from childhood. Maybe from early experiences of conditional affection. Maybe from watching others prioritize harmony over honesty. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the belief was no longer serving me. But releasing it felt like standing without skin. I didn't know how to be close without dissolving. I didn't know how to assert without apologizing. I didn't know how to exist in connection without negotiating my right to be there. That realization marked the beginning of something painful and necessary. I wasn't heartbroken because I had lost someone. I was heartbroken because I had finally met myself and realized how little space I had allowed that self to occupy. And the question that haunted me every night became sharper, more urgent: if I don't disappear anymore, will anyone still choose me? I didn't rebuild myself all at once. I learned to take up space in inches. At first, it felt unnatural, almost rude. I practiced saying what I felt without softening it. Naming preferences without justifying them. Letting silence exist instead of filling it with reassurance. Every small act of presence felt like a risk, like I was testing a boundary I had never been allowed to touch. The fear was immediate. If I don't adjust, I thought, I'll lose people. If I don't disappear, I'll be too much. That fear had governed my entire emotional life. It told me that love was conditional, offered in exchange for compliance, patience, understanding without reciprocity. It told me that to be chosen, I had to be easy. Unlearning that belief was painful. I noticed how often I wanted to retreat when something felt uncomfortable. How quickly I felt the urge to apologize for existing with edges. How deeply ingrained the reflex of self-erasure was. But I stayed. I let conversations feel awkward. I let others sit with my honesty. I let myself be seen incomplete, uncertain, occasionally inconvenient. And something surprising happened. Not everyone left. Some connections faded quietly, inevitably. They had been built on my absence, and without it, there was nothing holding them together. Losing those relationships hurt, but the pain was clean. It didn't hollow me out the way disappearance had. Other connections changed. They slowed down. Became more deliberate. Less intense, more real. I wasn't needed in the same way, and for the first time, that didn't scare me. I began to understand the difference between being needed and being chosen. Being needed makes you useful. Being chosen makes you visible. Visibility is terrifying when you've spent your life hiding. But it's also the only place where real connection can exist. I learned how to listen without absorbing. How to care without dissolving. How to say this matters to me without turning it into a negotiation. Those skills didn't come naturally, they came through discomfort, missteps, and moments where I almost slipped back into old patterns. Sometimes, I did slip. Growth isn't linear. There were days when loneliness felt easier than presence. When disappearing felt tempting again, familiar, painless, safe. But I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I had seen what it cost to vanish. Now, when I'm with someone, I stay inside myself. I notice when my body tenses, when my voice softens automatically, when my needs try to retreat. I don't punish myself for those impulses, I acknowledge them and choose differently. Not perfectly, but consciously. I no longer confuse love with endurance. I no longer measure connection by how much of myself I can sacrifice without complaint. I don't stay where my presence is tolerated only as long as it remains invisible. That shift didn't make my life easier. It made it honest. There are fewer people now. Fewer dynamics. Less noise. And within that quieter space, something solid has formed, a sense of self that doesn't vanish the moment someone else enters the room. I finally understand this: love that requires you to disappear isn't love. Closeness built on self-erasure isn't intimacy, and being chosen for your silence is not being chosen at all. I didn't lose myself loving others. I lost myself by believing that love demanded it. Now, I love differently. I show up whole. I stay present. I let myself be seen even when that visibility risks rejection. Because the truth is simple, and it took me years to accept it: if I have to disappear to be loved, then I am not the one being loved. And for the first time in my life, I choose to stay.